Sorry for coming late again. Today we'll be discussing the new state in world politics. So under this topic, we'll be discussing the collapse of imperialism in Africa and Asia country. So under this, we'll discuss what imperialism is all about, the early European exploration of Africa, the medieval European exploration of Asia, oceanic way to Asia, Portuguese monopoly over trade in Asia, in Indian Ocean and Asia. Then, going forward, we will later discuss the colonization of Africa, the internal causes, the external causes, transition to independence, then the wind of change, result of European imperialism, then the Africa and global market. First, what is imperialism? Imperialism is a state policy, practice, or advocacy of extending power and dominion, especially by direct territorial acquisition or by gaining political and economic control of other areas. Because it's always involved the use of power, whether military or economic, or some subtler form, imperialism has often been considered morally reprehensible, employed in international propaganda to denounce the discredit and opponent foreign policy. Alexander the Great. Imperialism is an ancient time is by that of the Persian and in strong contrast to the Asia was a ship, but the through imperialism between the 15th century and the middle of the 18th, England, France, and Netherlands, Portugal and Spain built empires in the Americas, India, and the East Indies. European political power, commerce, and cultures in Asia gave rise to growing trade in commodity, a key development in the rise of today modern world free market economy. In the 16th century, the Portuguese broke the overland monopoly of the Arabs and Italians in trade between the Asian and Europe by discovery of the sea route to India around the Cape of the Good. Ensuring the rise of the Dutch East India and around the Cape of Portuguese influence in Asia. Dutch forces first established independence based on the eastmost began Batavia, the newly formed fortified headquarters of the Dutch East India Company. And then between 1640 and 1660, wrested Malacca, Ceylon, some southern India port and the lucrative Japan trade from the Portuguese. Later, the English and the French established settlement in India and trade with China with the acquisition will gradually surpass. Following the end of the 7 Years' War in 1763, the British eliminated French influence in India and established the British East India Company, founded in 1600 as the most important political force on the Indian subcontinent. Before the Industrial Revolution in the mid to late 19th century, demand for oriental goods such as porcelain, silk, spices, and tea remained the driving force behind European imperialism. The Western European stake in Asia remained confined largely to trading stallions and strategic outposts necessary to protect trade. Industrialization power, however, dramatically increased European demand for Asian raw materials. Depression of the 1870s and provoking a scramble for the new market for European industrial products and financial services in Africa. The Americans, Eastern Europe, and especially in the Asia, the scramble coincided with the new era in global colonial expansion known as the New Imperialism. We saw a shift in focus from trade and indirect route to former colonial control of vast overseas territory, role as political expansion of their mother's country. Between the 1870s and the beginning of the World War I in 1914, the United Kingdom, France, and Netherlands established colonial powers in Asia, added to their empire's vast expanses of territory in the Middle East. The Italian subcontinent, the Southeast Asia, in the same period, the Empire of Japan, following the Meiji Restoration, the Japan Empire, following the end of the Franco-Prussian War in 1871, Tsarist Russia, and the United States, following the Spanish-American War in 1898, quickly emerged as a new imperial power in the East Asia and in the Pacific Ocean area. In Asia, World War I and World War II. Okay, let's quickly explain the early European exploration in Asia. European exploration of Asia started in the ancient Roman times along with the Silk Road. The Romans had knowledge of lands as distant as China. Trade and India through the Romans Egyptian Red Sea port was significant in the first century in the Common Era. Okay, under this, we have the medieval European exploration of Asia. Other Oceania voyage of Asia. We also have three others, Portuguese monopoly and Asia. So let's first discuss the medieval European exploration of Asia. In the 13th and 14th century, a number of Europeans, many of them Christian missionaries, had sought to penetrate into China. The most famous of these travelers was Marco Polo. But this journey had little permanent effect on East-West trade because of the series of political development in Asia in the last decade of the 14th century, which put an end to further European exploration of Asia. The Yuan dynasty in China, which had been deceptive to European missionaries and merchants, was overthrown, and new Ming rulers were found to be unreceptive of religion proselytism. Meanwhile, the Turks consolidated control over the Eastern Mediterranean, closing up key overland trade routes. Thus, until the 15th century, only minor trade and cultural exchanges between Europe and Asia continue at certain terminals controlled by the Muslim trade. Okay, now the next is the ocean voyage. The ocean voyage. Western Europe rulers determined to find new trade routes of their own. The Portuguese spearheaded the drives to find oceanic route that will provide cheaper and easier access to South and East Asia's goods. This shattering of oceanic routes between the East and West began with the unprecedented voyages of Portuguese and Spanish sea captains. Their voyages were influenced by medieval and European adventurers who had journeyed overland to the Far East and contributed to geographical knowledge of part of Asia upon their return. In 1488, Bartholomew Dias rounded the southern tip of African Union and sponsored of Portuguese John II, from which Ponzi noted that the coast swung northeast, that is the Cape of Good Hope, which Dias crew forced him to turn back. By 1497, Portuguese navigator Vasco da Gama made the first open voyage from Europe into India. In 1520, Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese navigator in the service of the Crown of Castile, found a sea route into the Pacific Ocean. So the next one is Portuguese monopoly over the trade in India, Ocean, and Asia. In 1509, the Portuguese under Francisco de Almeida won the decisive Battle of Deal against a John Mamluk and Arab fleet sent to expel the Portuguese of the Arabian Sea. The victory enabled Portuguese to implement a strategy of controlling the Indian Ocean. Early in the 16th century, Afonso de Abuco emerged as the Portuguese colony viceroy, most instrumental in the consolidating Portugal holdings in Africa and Asia. He understood that Portugal could wrest commercial supremacy from the Arabs only by force, and therefore devised a plan to establish Fort's strategic site, which would dominate the trade route and also protect Portuguese interests on land. In 1510, he conquered Goa in India, which enabled him to gradually consolidate control of most of the commercial traffic between Europe and Asia. Largely through trade, Europeans started to carry on trade from forts, acting as foreign merchants rather than as settlers. In contrast, earlier European expansion in the West Indies, later known as European as a separate continent from Asia, that they would call the Americans. Following the 1492 voyage of Christopher Columbus, involved every settlement of colonies that were treated as political expansions of the modern Europe. Clubbed by the potential of high profile from another expedition, the Portuguese established a permanent base in Cochin, Cochin, south of the Indian trade port of Calicut in the early 16th century. So let's move on now to the colonization of Africa. The colonization of Africa was a process that took place in the mid to late 1950 to 75. During the Cold War, the radical government change on the continent as colonial government made the transition to independent state. The process was often marred with violent political turmoil, widespread unrest, and organized revolt in both northern and sub-Saharan countries, including the Mao Rebellion in British Kenya, the Algerian War in French Algeria, the Congo crisis in the Belgian Congo, the Angolan War of Independence in Portuguese Angola, the Zanzibar Revolution in the Sultanate of Zanzibar, and the Nigerian Civil War in the secessionist state of Biafra. The scramble for Africa between 1870 and 1914 was a significant period of European imperialism in Africa that ended with almost all of Africa and a natural region being controlled as colony by the smaller number of European states, racing to secure as much as land as possible while avoiding conflict amongst themselves. The partition of Africa was confirmed in the Berlin Agreement in 1885. With little regard to local differences, almost all the pre-colonial states of Africa had lost their sovereignty, with the only exception being Liberia, which had been settled in the early 19th century by African-American former slaves. In Ethiopia, later occupied by Italy in 1936, Britain and France had the largest largest holding, but Germany, Spain, Italy, Belgium, and Portugal also had colonies. The process of decolonization began as direct consequence of World War II. By 1977, 50 African countries had gained independence from European colonial masters. Under this, there are other external causes that led to. There are two causes. The external causes will also have the internal causes. These are the things that led to the colonization of Africa. First, the external causes. During the World War, African soldiers were described into imperial military. Some African soldiers also volunteered. Veterans from the over 1.3 million Africans who participated in the World War II and fought in both European and Asian theaters of war. This led to a deeper political awareness